Good evening. I'm Melanie Risden with the Western Standard. Joining me this evening is lawyer Derek from WKA Lawyers in Airdrie, and we're going to be chatting about the City of Calgary councillors who met today in a regular council meeting. And one of the items on the agenda was to discuss the REAP program and a bylaw that the city has put in place around that program. So we've got Derek here who's got a little bit more insight. And so Derek, why don't you fill us in on what's going on?
So there is a long story behind this. I'll try to shorten it and make it as clear as possible. But in September, the province brought in a public health order that created this REP, this Restrictions Exemption Program. And people now just refer to it as the vaccine passport that we were never supposed to have in Alberta. But essentially, that's what it is. So we'll just call it the vaccine passport, the provincial one. And what the province did very intentionally was they carved out space for youth recreational activities. And Dr. Dina Hinshaw was very explicit in the weeks following that this vaccine passport was not intended to impact upon youth involvement in recreational activities. So that includes Girl Guides, all sorts of programs like that, taekwondo, hockey, soccer, basketball, things that
so
children...
Derek, yeah, so explain to me what that means then, what it looks like. What's a snapshot of it not affecting children's recreation, children's sports? What does that mean they have to do or abide by?
So currently the law is this, that if a business is listed in scope for the vaccine passport, they are permitted to decide whether or not they will go with the vaccine passport. If they choose not to go with the vaccine passport, they go into regular business restrictions, which is like 1/3 capacity, social distancing, wearing a mask, those sorts of things. But now if you're a restaurant, you can't have your dining room open unless you do the vaccine passport. So those eligible businesses choose that stream. Other businesses, they make a business decision, which stream is best for my customer and client base. And so what happened was as the law exists right now from the province, youth recreational activity is considered out of scope, meaning that if you provide youth recreational activities, you are not permitted in law to implement REP, the vaccine passport. And the reason was very clear from Dr. Dina Hinshaw. Youth mental health is a very important issue, and physical and social activities provided by recreational activities is so important to youth mental health during the pandemic that the province chose explicitly not to encumber youth and families involved in youth rec with this additional burden of the vaccine passport. But Calgary came along and decided to do the opposite. Calgary has its own bylaw called the vaccine passport bylaw, in which the city says, you know what? Even if you are an eligible business, we're going to decide for you that you must implement REP, must implement the vaccine passport. So what that has meant is that youth recreational activities is now covered by the provincial vaccine passport bylaw. So if you're a 12-year-old, you must provide proof of immunization upon entering a rec center to play hockey. If you're a 13-year-old girl going to Guides, you have to provide proof of a negative test in order to meet with your friends that you are at school with every day. And, otherwise, you don't get to do these activities. You'll be locked out of the city's facilities because the city has decided that it has more expertise and has the interests of Calgarians more in mind, better than the province does when it specifically said that it won't do this.
Now, it seems to be quite a confusing topic for many people. I know I've spoken to so many parents who are very confused by all of this. So to be specific then, the Alberta government, based on their design of REP, is that youth activities were not in scope, whereas what you're saying is the city's amendment of this bylaw instructs that these children's activities and sports are considered in scope now. Is that correct?
That is precisely correct. And
okay,
that's
and so
exactly what makes it illegal.
Right, and what's confusing as well is I've seen reports. This was actually just today. This was discussed in chambers today and voted on, actually unanimously voted on to bring this amendment in place. But I've been hearing from so many sources that what the city has done is aligned themselves more with the provincial regulations. But it sounds like the opposite has happened.
It is most certainly the opposite. If you open up the most recent public health order from the province, there are 2 columns at the end, the last 2 pages, I believe now. One column says in scope. The second column says out of scope. The column in scope says things like restaurants, it says recreational activities where participants are over the age of 18. In the other column, out of scope, it specifically says youth recreational activities where all participants are under the age of 18. So if you have a U15 hockey team, they are out of scope according to the province. That is the law.
Meaning that where they are participating in the sport, it needs to then restrict down to 1/3 capacity and do all of the other public health orders rather than require proof of vaccination or proof of negative test, correct?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, so it's very confusing. There are a lot of people who don't understand this. And again, I feel like the city has created sort of a picture that they are aligning, or maybe that's what people have assumed has happened here. But what you're saying is, in fact, they have contradicted what the province set forth.
So in law, there's two ways that a bylaw like this can contravene or contradict a provincial enactment. And that's one is to frustrate the purpose of that provincial enactment. And the second is to make it impossible to comply with both. Now, the city of Calgary has done both. They've frustrated the purpose. Dr. Dina Hinshaw was very clear about youth mental health and the importance of youth rec. The purpose of the province in keeping youth rec out of scope was to preserve and promote youth mental health. Calgary has done otherwise. It's frustrated that purpose. And now, as of today, they have explicitly made it impossible and displayed their intention to make it impossible to comply with both. So if you run a hockey association in this city, you now have no choice but to ask for proof of vaccination or proof of negative test. You will be violating a city bylaw if you do not do so. Yet at the same time, if you do that, you will be violating a provincial law. It is impossible to comply with both. So it both frustrates the purpose and also makes dual compliance impossible. So constitutional law, constitutional principles are very clear on this. When such a contradiction happens between 2 levels of government, the superior government's enactment prevails to the force of, or to the extent of the inconsistency. And quite frankly, a city is just a delegated authority under the provincial government's authority. It's essentially a board of the province. It has no authority in law to contradict anything that the province has brought in. And so, quite frankly, the city is out of line here and is bringing in a law that will harm children and has been harming children since it was first enacted. And they're just turning a blind eye. And today it looks like they've doubled down and just reinforced their position that they're taking.
And I know you have been supporting a number of parents who have children in rec facilities and rec programs and sports and whatnot. And I'm sure you're being sort of contacted on a regular basis. What are you hearing from parents? What's happening?
Well, parents are very frustrated and very confused. And it's not just the parents, it's also those hockey association boards and soccer and basketball, because they don't want to lose children. They want the children to be able to play because everyone knows children aren't really a major vector for COVID-19 infections. This has not been a problem. There's very, very strong evidence, mostly out of the American context, that basketball, football, hockey, soccer, these sorts of activities do not result in transmission of SARS-CoV-2 and resultant infections of COVID-19. It's extremely clear. Now, that being said, this province is currently a patchwork. Calgary is obviously the one I'm most familiar with. Calgary has decided to violate provincial law, in my opinion. And but yet if you go out to other places, into more rural areas, you find things like, well, our rec center is going to bring in a youth exemption. Well, there's no such thing as a youth exemption in law. That is made up whole cloth by facility operators who are trying to keep children involved. They're doing their best to try to keep children involved. And my impression is that the province would turn a blind eye to that because it also is meeting the province's goals to a great degree. But if you get even further away from Calgary's vortex, you'll find that most rinks, most rec facilities have implemented the proper program, the 1/3 capacity, social distancing and wearing a mask. They're actually following the law out in the rural places of Alberta. It's the city of Calgary where the law is not being respected.
So what it turns out, what it ends up for some of these kids that are playing sports is they, from say a Calgary-based team, perhaps can't participate in their Calgary games, but leaving the city and going to some of the more rural areas, they can participate because these other facilities are not implementing rep. So that's got to be difficult as well. Now, I know they're also allowing for negative COVID tests at this stage still, correct?
Yes, that is true. They are allowing for those negative tests. But now when you think of it, this is, if you go or make a phone call today, phone Costco and say, I would like an antigen test. They'll book you, but they're going to book you 4-5 days from now. And then they're going to charge you, I think, around $20 to get that done. Now, if you think, well, I can't wait that long, I need to get this done more quickly, and you go to Shoppers Drug Mart, you'll wait, you have to make an appointment. It's going to be whenever so-and-so is available. You can probably get it done more rapidly there because there's less demand, because the cost is around $40 a test.
Mm-hmm.
So then if you have a child who's in hockey or basketball or the sport that, they practice on Tuesday night, on Thursday night, they play games on the weekend, and these tests are only valid, the test results are only valid for 72 hours. That means you're testing at least twice a week. Sometimes you're going to be testing more than twice a week. So you're adding potentially $100 a week to the program that you already put your kid into. And I can talk to hockey fees. Hockey fees are in the thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And you're adding thousands of dollars more in rapid testing costs, plus the inconvenience of actually producing that test, going and getting it done, and then carrying it around with you, etc. And let me remind you, this is a cost that is being illegally imposed, in my view, on parents involved in recreational activities in Calgary.
Well, and I think the tough thing too, I've heard from some parents as well, is that with the vaccine mandates, they are not able to go in and watch their children perform or play or take part in the sport or dance or whatever it is that they're involved in. When this is in place and they're spending the money to get their child able to access the facility, but then the parents aren't able to at the same time, which can be very difficult and also dangerous when we're talking about younger kids.
That's correct. So here's a little personal story. My boy plays hockey, and this summer in his hockey program that he's involved in, he broke his collarbone. And if I had not been allowed to be in that facility when that happened, that would be a devastating experience for me and my wife as parents. Mm-hmm. Our little boy needed us at that moment. And if we were kept out of the facility, we might have heard about it an hour later. We might have heard about it a half an hour later. That's devastating. And you know what? That may have been very serious. To me, that's very serious. But that's far less serious than when we think of this in the context of the Graham James types that are in the dressing rooms with kids and potentially unattended. This is a very foolish and destructive policy.
So are you able to comment, Derek, on where things are at with some of the clients that you're supporting through this? I know that you are working hard to try to get some of these overturned, these mandates. Are you able to comment on where things are right now?
Yes, well, we have sued the City of Calgary. We filed documents early in December and served the City of Calgary, which they conveniently somehow misplaced and didn't give to the legal department until the new year. So our court date, our first court date was coming up, and we hadn't heard back from any of the lawyers in Calgary. So we contacted them and asked, what's going on? And they were completely unaware this was happening. And so there's been some unbelievable incompetence, and it has slowed things down. And we are in the process now of trying to get the court to understand the urgency of this matter, that a child's activities are only for a short period of a child's life, and that parental involvement is very important. This is an incredibly urgent matter. This is for a very short time span, and it cannot be compensated with money. This is opportunity lost, and once that opportunity is gone, it can never be gotten back. So we're in the process right now of trying to get that process trying to get the case expedited and heard as soon as possible. But I'm a little discouraged with the response we've received from Calgary thus far.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be disappointing. So I think what we'll do is we'll just stay in touch, and hopefully you can keep us abreast of what comes of it and what happens in the courts. Anything else you want to add to what came down today from the City of Calgary?
I think it's very interesting that council did vote 11-0 in favor of the amendment. It shows that they've really locked arms on this matter. I'm told that one councillor did ask sort of probably a question she was given to ask about what are other communities doing? And I'm told that they had two general practitioner doctors there to give them the gloss of having consulted with someone who's an expert. I'm not sure any of that is relevant, but we'll see in time.
Well, thanks for the clarity on the situation, because again, there is a lot of confusion around this, and even looking at some of the reports that have come out of this, and people discussing that the city is now getting closer to aligning with the province, again, still just doesn't make sense to me when the opposite has transpired. So thank you very much for the clarity on that, and let's keep in touch, and you can keep us updated on how things go.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Derek.